This is the Convene podcast. Welcome to another episode of the Convene Talk. My name is Maggie, digital media editor. Jen, it's your turn to tell us more about the story that we're discussing today. So over to you.
Sure. Thanks, Maggie. This is Dienst, senior editor. So this is a story that I saw on the BBC titled Why It's Time to Rethink What It Means to Be a Tourist. I was super excited to read this because it's actually an interview with a travel writer, Paige McClanahan. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing her name correctly, whose book I'm actually reading right now. I picked it up last week and it's called The New Tourist, Waking Up to the Power and Perils of Travel. And I'm not that far into it, I'll admit. I think I'm about not even 100 pages in. But I so far I'm really digging the premise and where the direction that she's going, which is basically that travel is neither good nor bad necessarily, or it is both good and bad. It's messy. There's a lot of good that it does historically. I mean, it's the way people have been brought together. But also, we know that, like anything, when kind of unchecked, a lot of bad things can happen. And I'll kind of read just like the end of her introduction so y'all can get the gist of where she's going. But she says, because to be a tourist is a privilege. And for many of us, it's one of life's great pleasures. With the right approach, which begins with a deep understanding of what's at stake, tourism can also be a powerful force for good. So the rest of the book seems like it's really going to dive into what the right approaches are and exploring that. And that's what this article talks about as well. So one of the things that she touched on in the article is some locals who are fighting back against tourists. And I've seen a couple other articles touching on what's going on in Barcelona right now, where locals have used water guns to shoot tourists with water and just basically make them feel uncomfortable and tell them to go away. They're protesters. I think, to me, my take on it is I understand their feelings, but I do feel like they're misdirected. I saw another travel journalist write about this on LinkedIn and say, really the people we should be squirting with water guns are the people who are not regulating things to make their destinations better for the people who live there before the people who visit. And this is actually something that, Barbara, you and I explored in an article back in 2019, which I went back and read this morning. And it actually focused, the first part of it focused on Barcelona and how protesters, back then and even way before that, are not too happy about the number of tourists that have infiltrated their city because it's taken away affordable housing. It makes it, during these high travel months during the summer, really uncomfortable for them because they're not able to get out and do and see anything. I mean, there's just it's a really good example of what happens when tourism is unchecked and the floodgates are open and your city is completely inundated. So I was curious to maybe hear from you guys if you can think of some like good examples of destinations that have been maybe a little more proactive on this front, and whether or not our industry, event professionals, have a responsibility here, which I think they do, in choosing destinations that maybe aren't dealing with this problem, maybe choosing destinations that are a little more off the beaten path. I think I just read an article today where some of these off the beaten track destinations are seeing a bump in visitors, which is great.
I was just going to say that the one that I had read about was Venice having a day pass for tourists to try to stem the flow or the overflow of tourists. That's all that I've seen in terms of a destination really doing something differently. Or the other destinations I think you had talked about earlier, Barbara and Jen, about not allowing the big cruise ships to come and just like have all of their thousands of passengers spill over into the destination and overtake it. Those are the two instances I've heard, but maybe Barbara, you have something else?
No, I was thinking of Venice and the day pass. And also there's it's like a law, that city law, that you cannot go out just walking. if you're not a resident after like 8, unless you can show that you are going to a restaurant or a bar, but you can't just go out and take a stroll in Venice, which I think is just to me a sign of where we're at, because that's kind of the most, when you talk about tourist versus traveler, I think a traveler is going to want to take the walk and maybe not necessarily have a destination and discover. So I think that that kind of seems like an example of the thing kind of eating itself, destroying itself. I worked in Brooklyn in the Dumbo neighborhood where there's this just such an iconic street. I think everyone would recognize it now, where it's cobblestones, and then through 2 buildings you see the Manhattan Bridge, and you also just see the New York skyline. And it was only a couple of blocks from where I worked, and I started just taking a picture every day of what that street looked like and sending it to my niece. And I wish I'd kept it up, because that even when it was raining or snowing, there would be, 50 or 60 people waiting in line to take their picture on this street. And I feel like, when that happens, it's gone, except for the middle of the night or in our memories. My daughter had the idea of, she went to Granada, and she was like, what if there were phoneless periods? What if there were times when you couldn't take your phone into museums? You couldn't take your phone. You had to like leave your phone behind. And she said, I would sign up for that, because I think we're so much in the consumption. We're like consuming. We're consuming ourselves. So how do we stop that? And I don't really know. I don't think that that means that there's not lots to see. Like most of the world are not those iconic places. There's just millions of places that are, delightful experiences that connect you to something you didn't know before and you'd never seen before, and you understand more about the culture. I think that is the value of travel. And I think that there's got to be change in how we view travel, which is the tourist versus traveler, but there's also got to be a way to travel without contributing to the climate change crisis. So I don't have answers to that. I would love to hear what you're thinking, Maggie.
Yeah, thanks. I was like, it just sparked an idea or a thought more. Thinking of all the influencers in social media, when you're saying about the phones and all the pictures, I believe a lot of these kind of instincts now in the tourists are embedded by everything they see on social media. So you see a place and you want the same picture, but you have done the picture, right? It's in your archive, which kind of, I don't know, it's right. There's a lot to discuss about that. And I think also influencers now, first of all, they spoil a lot of places. There's a lot of footage on social media where you see influencers really barging into places they're not supposed to be in, and just to make that shot, and just being very loud in places that you're not supposed to be loud or to do certain things, and just crossing all the boundaries and all the lines. I don't like that. But then again, we're all consuming that content. So it's like, which comes first? Like, where do we draw a line and say, I'm not going to look at that content because I know it actually had a bad influence on the destination. And for me, that experience was it was last year when I went to Kyoto in Japan. Everybody is talking about Kyoto and how beautiful it is. All I could see were crowds, and I could only hear, foreign languages. I could not even hear Japanese. And I was so disappointed. And everybody asked me, how did you like Kyoto? I'm like, I'm not going back there. I don't want to be part of the crowd. It's hard to book a restaurant. Like, you have to make reservation months in advance, and you just bump into, foreigners. And I don't want that experience. I want the authentic Japanese experience. At the same time, like, how do we preserve that? And there were a lot of articles recently also about Japan, the fact that their currency has dropped in value against the US dollar, so there's more tourists there, and that they're everywhere. Pretty much same situation like in Barcelona. So these are important cultural places, nature, climate change. There's so many factors, but I would never forget something that a teacher of mine said about being a tourist. He's like, when we're tourists, we automatically become dumb. He's like, I have no answer how to tackle that. It's just the reality of things, which is kind of funny and sad at the same time. Michelle, what are you thinking?
Just thinking about how this relates to the business of events. And I would say, going back to being dumb, I would say that's one of the responsibilities for a meeting planner, is to educate their attendees and also to create some kind of activity or social impact to give back to the community, and also just to be respectful. I think it's not just the problem with over tourism isn't just too many people. It's a lack of respect for others and a lack of respect for the residents, a lack of respect for the environment. Is just those things. We do become dumb to that, or numb to it. I don't know, but I think that would be the responsibility of a meeting planner or an organization, to somehow educate and to inculcate that kind of a cultural awareness going to a destination and create opportunities to give back. I don't know about I don't know about picking destinations, like, convening a meal will be in Barcelona during the World Cup. So I think that we'll be doing things that are to give back and to embrace the culture and to be respectful of the culture. But events are held in these beautiful big cities for a reason, to attract attendees to come, and also because they have the infrastructure to support big events. So I don't know that that planners can say, oh, we're not going to go to any of these big touristy areas because we're going to contribute to the problem. I think it's how do you go to these places and do it differently.
I agree, Michelle. I feel like generally event professionals like already know and feel this and understand this, just for the sense that I get when I talk to event professionals for the most part. However, I do think where it counts the most are the governments and the DMOs and whoever has the power to instill regulations and boundaries within those destinations. And it's different, depending on the place. The example that I'm thinking of, and this might be one of the most extreme, is Bhutan, which I just got back from. And they're famous because for a long time they had a $300 a day fee. And that's like a tax that's levied on tourists who come, and you pay that, and that goes toward their sustainability goals, which encompasses everything from environmental goals to preserving their culture. And for being such a tiny, isolated country that is still very deeply rooted in their traditions and customs that go back, centuries and centuries and centuries, they have a pretty forward-thinking, modern approach to this, which I think we collectively, the rest of the world, could learn from. We've actually lowered that tax. It's now only 100. A lot of times, I went with a tour group. I went with G Adventures, and that was included in my fee. But, the sense that I got while I was there is it's something that's instilled in their citizens. And it's a little bit different because they're a democratic monarchy. I might be saying that incorrectly, but they really revere and respect the person who's in power, the king and the queen. So that's kind of set by them. And then everyone really laps up that Kool-Aid for sure. But it's really serving them well. And they are expanding. They are, doing a lot to expand. They're, adding a new airport. They're building a new city because tourism is a huge industry there for them. But they still are really smart about keeping it small and keeping it. I think this is the key, only really opening it up to high value tourists. And I don't mean rich people necessarily. I mean people who, yes, can pay a certain amount of money to come there. That's part of it. But I think the other part of it is people who are coming to experience the culture, to hike like I did the Trans-Bhutan Trail, or you're spending time learning and engaging with the people there. You're not getting off of a cruise ship for 5 hours to go down 20 margaritas and then leaving, and not at Margaritaville, which isn't even a local company. Like I feel like when you look at these cruise ships and the people who get off and the value that they bring to the destination, it's not a lot. They're not considered high value tourists. This is something we touched on in our 2019 story. However, meeting attendees are considered high value. And I think that's something that we have going for our industry, and that we do have a little bit more power to make a better, like you were saying, Michelle, like we can give back. We have the time and the resources to make a more positive impact on the destination. So, Barbara, what are you thinking?
I guess I'm thinking about the definition of high value and also how that intersects with privilege, and how, like I'm uncomfortable with the idea that, I mean, this is the way the world is, but that travel is only accessible to those that have, that can afford $300 a day on top of the other expenses. And I'm wondering like what would be the reaction by the business events industry if Barcelona would levy that kind of a tax on meeting participants? That I think I can't see them doing that just because of the
Yeah,
value that business travel brings. And I'm wondering, I don't think this is very practical, but I'm wondering if there would be a way to substitute another kind of test. Like if you had to like prove the value that your event was going to bring to the residents of Barcelona beyond just dollars. Like
that's
what,
a good
like
idea.
how would that change how we do things? I mean, I'm really bringing up a lot more questions than answers, but I do think that that measuring value only in dollars, and I'm not saying that you were doing that in any way. I'm just saying that the way that we had do that, like look at consumption and dollars as the value metrics, are just like, if there'd be a way to change that, I think that could change
I
what
agree with
happens.
you. And I think like I honestly think cruise ships are a huge part of the problem. Sorry if we have any cruise advertisers, they're gone. But I don't, and I live in a city that protests against cruise ships, but I think allowing thousands of people to disembark day after day. I mean, there's just a story on Alaska, how someone got on, there was just a local was just begging. We want one day a week where there's not thousands of cruise ship passengers getting off in our tiny city. That's all we want. I think you're right. Like the answer isn't necessarily the extreme, like $300 a day. It's how can we lessen access? Like, do we need a enormous cruise port, where 20,000 people are coming in every day? Maybe that's getting rid of that, or limiting the number of passengers who can enter the city to, 5,000 instead of whatever the numbers are. I don't know what the numbers are, but I think you're right. It's not just a huge fee, daily tax.
Yeah. I mean, we're not great at setting limits. I mean, I think the way we approach things is like, if I can pay for it, I'm entitled to it. And I think
Yeah.
just changing, just as Michelle said, just respect for what is at stake.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
limiting where you can go. So it's interesting in Bhutan, you can't, which is in the Himalayas, most of the mountain ranges you can't hike in because this is a Buddhist country. They consider those mountains sacred. No one can hike there. The parts that we hiked, because it was along a certain trail, we could, and there were also things that we couldn't access. The monastery that we went to on the last day, Tiger's Nest, we had to put our phones in lockers before we entered. It was one of the most life-changing experiences of my life. I don't have a single photo of it. I kind of wish I did, but I don't. And that's okay, because that's their rules. And like, you're exactly right. It's about respect, reverence, and it can't be a free for all. We have to put boundaries and limitations, because too much of a good thing, it's a free for all. It's too much of a good thing, and people will just eat it up and destroy it.
And as encouraged as I am about the progress that aviation is making in different kinds of like non-fossil fuel petrol, that might be not possible. But we can't wait for that. We can't say, oh, they're working on it, let's do as we're doing. Like, we have to simultaneously be looking for those solutions to where we can travel in a regenerative way, where we're not extracting natural resources to the degree where we're destroying ourselves, and also changing how we think about the places that we visit and take our meetings and events to.
I agree. I think the article that I saw yesterday, which I'll send you guys a link to, we'll post it, showed that there's an increase in like the off the beaten track destinations, places that have cooler temperatures, places that don't have the crowds. I don't know if y'all saw the Oslo ad that aired and got a lot of press, but it was a really funny ad where they were like, don't come here. That was kind of the premise. And I think it was kind of perfect because it speaks to me. I want to go where the crowds aren't. I don't want to go. That's why I went to Bhutan. Like, I don't want to go. I would love to go to Kyoto in Japan. I'm trying to plan a trip there for next year. And like, I am talking with my friend and we're trying to figure out where can we go where there won't be crowds. Like, that's deliberately how we're planning it. And I think that's might become the norm, or the new standard, you know?
Here's my dream trip. I want to see the Milky Way again really soon in all its glory. Like, go to a dark sky place, because it's been a long time since I was at a place long enough that I could wait for the sky, so if it was overcast. But that's what I want to see now, is the Milky Way.
You should go to the Atacama Desert. I went there, and it is the most beautiful place I've ever seen. First of all, it looks like Mars. Second of all, it's a dark sky, I guess, community, like an official one. And they have an observatory where you can look through like crazy telescopes. I actually met an astronomer, a group of them while I was there. They have like had a gathering of astronomers there. But people go there just to see the stars. It's wildly beautiful and insane, but hard to get to.
Yeah. I think I can go to Yosemite probably a little easier
than the northern desert of Chile.
I was thinking of something about events and what you were saying, that events should bring different kind of value, not only money. And I think a lot of associations are having these programs that they may make sure that they leave something behind that's good for the local community, which I think it's great, and it's a legacy that's important. And I see more and more association events thinking of kind of down this route, and they're strategic about picking their destinations. And I also see the other way around, destinations being very selective of who they try to target and bring to their destination. So if they're doing that for events, that's a positive part. And now they should just start doing that for tourists as well. Like for the example of Bhutan, I think is great.
That's an extreme example, but I think there are things others could learn from it. I don't think necessarily the answer is a huge fee every day. I had to save a lot of money to go on that trip. It was worth it, but I agree. I think limiting access and being strategic, and like the Netherlands Tourism Board, they've started, that's actually like talked about in this book, about how they've started trying to steer people towards other destinations besides Amsterdam because it got so popular, and kind of playing up other places. I think, it's got to be like a mix of things to me. But
yeah, for sure. Well, we raised a lot of questions. And I just want to invite our audience, if they have questions for us, to just make sure to send them our way, and we'll consider addressing them in a future podcast episode. And there will be links to all the things we referred to, so you can read more about the topic. And until next time.